Chapter 25. He didn't remember the journey to Tubbo's house, but apparently Ronbu carried him. If it were another time, that would have bothered him. If he weren't so exhausted, then maybe he would have cared or even been embarrassed. But he felt nothing. Tommy let himself be pushed onto Tubbo's bed, his head too numb to his surroundings. His eyes stung, yet he had no more tears left to shed. Emotions were just too much for him. Everything was. The fabric against the exposed skin of his legs, the scratching sensation of the bed frame digging into his scarred back, the itching of his nose as another wave of scents violated his nostrils. It was too much. All of it. He wanted the fog to return, the clouds to overwhelm and leave him in a state of nothing. A place with no worries, no sadness, nor abandonment. The room to rest until his final minute alive. But he couldn't let that happen. Not when Tubbo and Ronbu were by his side, whispering between themselves, worried for him. Soft and heavy hands pushed a hoodie over his head and down his back. It was one of Ronbu's hoodies. He forgot he only had a thin t-shirt on. Wilbur's clothes were probably still crumpled next to the bench, suffering the same deserted fate as Tommy. As Ronbu helped aim Tommy's arms into the hoodie sleeves, he leaned into his friend's side, staying there with closed eyes, too scared to open them again. The mattress dipped, and an arm curled around him. Tommy melted into Ronbu's touch. "He was supposed to believe me," he whispered. "Who was?" "Wilbur." Ronbu's hand rubbed circles onto his shoulder, though it did nothing to ease the resurfacing thoughts. "I was so ready, Ronbu." He sobbed, empty and dry. "I was so ready to finally be happy and..." He buried his head into Ronbu's side, hoping that the nestling of the bedsheets covered up his whimpers. "Sleep, okay? We'll handle this in the morning," Ronbu muttered softly. He shook his head and pried open his eyes. No, I can't sleep." Ronbu sighed, his fingers brushing the hair next to the shell of Tommy's ear. "How about we force Tubbo to make some food for us then?" Ronbu offered, rolling his eyes at the look Tommy gave him. "There are smoke detectors in the kitchen. He'll be fine." Tommy hummed, contemplating whether a house fire would make possibly his last day in this life better or worse. The hunger in his stomach decided for him. After Tubbo managed not to wake up the entire household by setting off the fire and smoke alarms, the trio sat on the bed, eating pancakes. The early rising sun peeked through the shut curtains. Tommy rested his head on Tubbo's legs, content whilst the other two played Super Smash Bros. As he listened to Ronbu's cackles and Tubbo's string of swears, it hit him. This was probably the last time he'd ever see them in this life. The last time he'd see them at all. He won't have a person to torment for being taller than him and American, yet still be able to rely on for support. Someone to tease for their addiction to online shooting games and obsession with South Park, whilst also being thankful for how their cheerful presence always kept him warm. He will never again be part of a trio that worked. A group he felt included in, appreciated, and cared for. Even if he did find people like this in the future, it wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't be them. These were the people who laughed at his shitty jokes, were patient enough to deal with his endless bullshit, and allowed themselves to be pushed around by him, of all people. He loved them. A hand brushed along his arm. Ronbu noticed him staring off at the distance. "You with us?" Tommy glanced up at Ronbu. glad that his mask and glasses were off just so he could see the expressions on his face. The candor swimming in his gray eyes, the concern furrowing his brows, the crinkle of a curious smile on his lips. Without a second thought, he tackled Ronbu into a hug, ignoring Tubbo's protests about their ongoing game. "I still hate you, by the way," he mumbled into Ronbu's shirt. Ronbu chuckled and secured his grip on him. "Ah, yes, it's common to show your hatred for your enemies with affection." Tommy giggled at his sarcastic tone and let go. His arms tingled. "I'm going to miss this," he murmured, not intending for either of them to hear him. The covers ruffled and Tubbo moved closer. The video game left paused. "All right, I've had enough of this shit," Tubbo announced sharply. "What the fuck is up with you?" Tommy huffed, knowing this conversation was inevitable. "You act so off whenever death is mentioned. Like, don't think I forgot that shit you pulled at Clementine's party and your bucket list in London. You're hiding something from us." Tubbo looked over at Ronbu for support, but the other turned his head. He scowled, shrinking into himself. Hurt flared in his face. "Okay, you're hiding something from me, then. Just me." "Tubbs, if the next thing that comes out of your mouth isn't an explanation, I'm bringing Benson up here to bite you," he threatened, glaring at them both. "Tell me." "How will I know you'll believe me?" Tommy asked, hesitant. "I trust you." He flinched, the reminder of Wilbur still fresh in his head. His last confession of his curse had broken that trust he treasured. He fidgeted with his sleeve. Fine, he said as he bit on his lip, trying to stomach his next words. "I have this thing where I'm reincarnated into a different Greek myth that influences my life until I guess it correctly." He avoided Tubbo's eyes, preparing himself to be yelled at again, for his words to be twisted and doubted by another person he wholeheartedly loved. He didn't want to be turned away again, abandoned. "Oh." Tubbo exhaled with no disgust or anger. Instead, he seemed intrigued, excited. "So you're like Tobias?" Tommy froze. The strain in his shoulders stilled. "What?" Tubbo shrugged, as if what he had said was part of a casual conversation. "Yeah, he was my great-grandfather, but he went by a different name since he didn't want people to know he was, that Tobias _. Founder of Snowchester and all that shit." Tommy's mouth gaped open. "You know about the curse?" He made sure that our bloodline knew, and carried on the knowledge. But I don't know if my parents have told Nicky yet. I think his first myth was that person who opened a box or something. I don't know Greek mythology. "Tubbo," he interrupted. "You believe me?" An honest grin curled its way onto Tubbo's mouth. "Yeah, of course I do." Relief flooded through him. Holy fuck. He believed him. Tubbo believed him. No hands shoved him against the wall, dug his back into the wooden panels. No one shouted and looked down at him with a distrustful glare. "What age did you die in your first life?" Tubbo asked. The smile wiped off Tommy's face. Fuck. Tubbo knew about that condition of the curse then. His eyes flickered between Tubbo and Ronbu, anxious to answer for both of their sakes. "Why's that important?" Ronbu said, confused. Dread lodged in Tommy's throat. "It's how long he has to figure it out until he dies again," Tubbo explained, oblivious to Tommy's distress. Ronbu frowned. "But that means—" He stopped, mouth slightly agape as he realized. "Tommy?" he panted, his voice wavering. Tommy squirmed in his seat as guilt replaced the relief he felt only seconds ago. He sat helpless as Ronbu panicked, his breathing quickening as tears welled in his eyes. "Why'd you lie to me?" Ranbu whispered, his lips trembling. His chest heaved as he failed to control his breathing. "I know I'm being a hypocrite since I told you that you don't have to tell me everything, but why didn't you tell me you had until your 16th birthday to guess?" Tubbo made a noise of distress from beside them. "I didn't want to hurt you," he muttered, remorse thick on his tongue. A tear slipped down Ranbu's face, and he flinched as if it burned him. "Do you know what would have hurt me more?" Ranbu's voice cracked as he wiped his face. "You dying, when I thought you had until the rest of your life to figure it out." A wrecked cry left Tommy's mouth. "I'm sorry. You died when you was 16? Tubbo faltered, in denial of the words he spoke. The world caved in on him. He didn't want them to find out like this. He fucked up. He fucked it all up. He delayed this so he wouldn't hurt them, but he just gave them more pain, more heartache and unavoidable grief. He was a bad friend, a bad brother, a bad everything. "You have a day?" Ranbu said, trying to keep the pain out of his voice. Yet the boy breathed with anguish and sorrow. "You have a day until—" He couldn't even say it. He got up from the bed and began to pace, each step inflaming his agitation. "You can't go," Tubbo declared, blinking away the wetness pooling in his eyes. "You can't!" "I'm sorry." "What am I without you?" Tubbo asked. His heart ached. Tommy smiled sadly and adjusted the red bandana around Tubbo's neck. "Yourself." His answer only seemed to sadden Tubbo even more. "I love you guys," he said, needing to say the words despite the pain it brought. "I don't deserve you." Tubbo slapped him across the face. "Don't say that shit, dickhead." Tubbo grabbed onto his shoulders, forcing Tommy to stare at him. "You don't get to say that shit. You don't. Sobs broke his tough exterior. He fell forward and rested his forehead against Tommy's as the tears fell. "You deserve us. You deserve them. He trailed off, his breathing picking up as Tommy clasped a hand on Tubbo's cheek. Tommy hushed him softly. I get it, Tubbs. I won't say it again." "You better fucking not, because it's complete bullshit. Though you didn't have to slap me to get the point across." Tommy tried to joke. Tubbo narrowed his eyes at him, sniffling into his sleeve. "How else am I supposed to knock sense into you?" The phrase knocking sense into someone doesn't have to be literal. It is to me. Ranbu sat back down, his hands shaking. "You have less than 24 hours," he said solemnly. Tommy's shoulders tensed, and he nodded. "I want to hate you," he revealed, still crying. Tommy recoiled, but Ranbu gripped onto his hands. "I want to hate you so badly, but I can't. The first thing you did when you came into my life was insult me for being emotional over a video game, and ever since then, you wormed yourself into everything. You're my best friend." Ranbu, with glistening eyes, stared into Tommy's dying soul. "And you could die today." Tommy shook his head. "I'll figure it out." He tried to pull every bit of confidence he could fake into his words, gather assurance that wasn't genuine, just for Ranbu to get that look of despair out of his face. "And if you don't?" Ranbu hesitated to ask. "I will." He squeezed Ranbu's hands. I will figure out my myth. A part of him started to accept it himself. What happened then? Tubbo asked, and Tommy tilted his head, confused. Why were you at the bench? He paused, and hugged the hoodie tighter around him. He was more embarrassed over it than anything. That he was such an idiot to think that Wilbur would believe him. Ranbu believed him because he was Ranbu. Tubbo already knew about the curse, but Wilbur... He thought the trust between them was enough for Wilbur to believe the unrealism of reincarnation and Greek gods. But obviously not. I told Wilbur, and he called me a liar. He eventually said. He doesn't trust me now. You're not a liar, Tommy. Tubbo proclaimed, sincerely. Wilbur's just too much of a little bitch to listen to you. Tommy and Ranbu gave him a look. Tubbo rolled his eyes. You're booing me, but I'm right. This isn't a Wilburcraft slander-free household. Tubbo, Wilbur is the reincarnation of W. Soot, but he just doesn't remember it. Ranbu explained. Oh. Tubbo said. Still, he's a bitch. Tommy turned to Ranbu. He reacted to Zagreus' name. The god who cursed us all. He knew him. It makes sense, though. Ranbu said. If he's beginning to remember like you last told me, then he might remember the afterlife and rebirth parts of W. Soot's life. The last thing I said to him was that I hoped he remembered. He whispered, ashamed of himself. I don't want that to happen. It scared him. Not just Wilbur remembering the shit he put Tommy through during his first life, but the murders, crimes, and innocent blood he spilt during his other lives. He would remember being a terrorist, a mass murderer in 1960s America. This Wilbur cried whenever animals died on those nature shows. Tommy couldn't bear to think how he'd react to those memories. Well? Tubbo said, interrupting the taunts in his head. I don't know how to help you with all that, but I can give you your birthday present early. As much as that came out of nowhere, he appreciated the sentiment. Tubbo handed him a squished toy in a clear plastic bag, the Amazon label still attached. He sighed before opening the bag, the tremors in his hand making it difficult. It was a screwed-up blue and magenta octopus plushie, one of those toys you could fold into itself to display two emotions with different colors and sewn facial expressions. You wanted bitches, so I got you Octopussy. Tommy wheezed as Ranbu facepalmed. Never say that again. How do you feel right now? Tubbo asked as Tommy fiddled with the disfigured octopus. He stared at the empty plate of pancakes on the side of the bed, the paused Super Smash Bros. On the TV, the uncertainty in Tubbo's whatever fucking colored eyes, and the normal awkwardness of Ranbu's stature. For a moment in time, this was just a normal day with his two best friends. Tommy pushed the octopus so it showed the happy side. You're farming Oz. Tubbo scoffed. Tommy frowned, and Tubbo pointed to Ranbu, who was close to tears again. Is there a limit to how many times I can cause Ranbu to cry in a day? Tommy asked, because I think I've exceeded it. Shut up. Ranbu grunted, lightly smacking the octopus out of his hands. You can't silence me, he quipped back. Where's my present from you? I don't have it with me, Ranbu said. But it can be me helping you not die at the end of today. Tommy bit on his cheek, considering the half-lidded eyes of his two best friends and the incoming brightness in the room from the rising sun. Can we sleep first? He asked, and continued as Ranbu went to protest. We could go through possible myths I could be after, when we have full brain power. Ranbu, after his many attempts at convincing him otherwise, eventually agreed. As the three huddled on Tubbo's bed, Tommy sighed. knowing that he'd need to leave before either of them woke up. If he didn't leave, the last time they'd hold him would be his dead body. The weight of a deceased loved one was a burden you never forgot. With more light bleeding into the room, he shuffled out of Tubbo's tight grip and cried one last silent tear. He needed to go.